Good morning and welcome to the Growing Sustainability Together webinar. Understanding how we can all promote the conservation of our agricultural lands, a webinar jointly hosted by Illinois Soybean Association and the Nature Conservancy. My name is Michael Gill. I am the Director of Conservation Ag for the Illinois Soybean Association. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today as we provide an in-depth overview of Illinois soybean farmers' sustainable production methods and conservation practices. We will also discuss current partnerships with conservation and environmental groups like TNC and how they furthered innovation around sustainability. The objective of today's webinar is to discuss what sustainability means to farmers, to consumers, and to environmentals, non-GMO or non-NGOs, and to review the complementary aspects and disconnects. I'd like to introduce Megan Baskerville, the Illinois Ag Program Director for the Nature Conservancy in Illinois. Good morning, Megan.
Thanks, Michael.
If you have questions during the webinar, please feel free to type them in the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom window, and we will answer those following the presentation. At the end of the webinar today, there will be a short survey to fill out that will pop up in your browser window. So please be sure to take a moment and fill it out. And one more note that today's webinar will be recorded in the event you would like to rewatch or share it with your network. At this point, I'm going to hand it over to Megan to provide an introduction of TNC. Please join me in welcoming Megan.
Thanks, Michael. Happy to be with you all this morning. And thanks to Illinois Soy for partnering on this webinar and to discuss this topic. So with this quick intro, I just wanted to provide some context on why the Nature Conservancy engages in ag conservation work in Illinois. And then I'll be back later on to share some examples of that work. But if you're not familiar with us, the Nature Conservancy is a global organization whose mission is to conserve the lands and waters on which all life depends for both people and nature. We can go to the next slide. So to achieve this mission, we must boldly address the biodiversity and climate crises over the next decade. I think IPCC's latest report on climate really underlines this need to act now. So by maximizing our ability to affect change between now and 2030, we can shape a brighter future for people and our planet. TNC works in over 70 countries across the globe and all US states where we're working towards these organizations. All of us are working towards these 2030 goals. Next slide. But as a global organization, the solutions to these complex challenges inherently look different wherever we are. I'm really grateful to work for an organization that is led by these guiding principles on the screen. The how is really as important as the what. And since the 1950s, TNC has strived to bring solutions that are grounded in science, honor local knowledge and stakeholders, and utilize multiple levers to implement conservation that is locally relevant and resilient. Next slide. And so as a geography major, I tend to think in maps, but I think these two maps give us a really clear picture of why engaging with ag land in Illinois is so important. Given its dominant land use in Illinois, about 75% of Illinois' land is currently in production ag, TNC believes ag land has to be a part of the solution if we are going to achieve our biodiversity and climate goals, which are aligned with Illinois' own conservation goals, particularly improving water quality, not only for Illinois, but for the larger Mississippi River watershed. And the good news in all of this is with agronomic and technological advancements, we feel really confident in envisioning an ag system in Illinois that not only delivers agronomic benefits to the farmer to meet the growing pressure they feel to increase production, but also contributes positive environmental outcomes, also delivering on those same growing demands from consumers and the larger community to provide conservation outcomes from that exact same acre, so that where we see ag products being produced, we also see clean water, wildlife habitat, and climate mitigation benefits being delivered. So I will pause with that for now and send it back to Michael.
Thanks, Megan. So as Megan talked, Illinois is a huge state for agriculture. Over 75% of the state's total land is in production. That results in Illinois being the largest soybean producer in the United States. And if Illinois were a country on its own, it would be the 5th largest country as far as production is concerned. So a huge amount of acres. It also ranks as one of the highest states as far as the average bushels per acre. Illinois has over 72,000 farms as of 2019. And according to the US Census Bureau, there are about 12.6 million people in Illinois. So in short, farming in Illinois is a big business. Next slide, please. The US Ag Census also reveals that as far as tillage is concerned, that nearly 75% of the acres in Illinois are either no-tilled or reduced tilled, with only 28% of those remaining intensively tilled. So that's down from 9.5% since 2012. About currently, 3% of those acres are covered by cover crops, and that's up about 1.6% since 2012. Next slide, please. Uses of soy are very diverse in Illinois. As far as a lot of the soybeans that come out of Illinois go into feed production for livestock, but also a certain percentage of those go into biodiesel production. Biodiesel is, of course, a biofuel that has about 11% less carbon monoxide emissions than what normal diesel does. There's a certain percentage of those soybeans that are used for human consumption, whether it's as an isolated protein component or whether it's a active ingredient that's drawn out of there, such as soy lecithin. Dust suppressants are becoming a bigger portion of what soybeans can be used to for use on gravel roads or around construction sites. They provide dust suppressant. Soy-based sealants are coming on the scene. So both sealants of concrete and of asphalt, soy-based adhesives, and believe it or not, Goodyear Tires has a line of tires that are soy-based in their oil within those tires. And there's more that we won't talk about here today. So next slide, please. The US has, for some time now, had a soybean sustainability assurance protocol, and this protocol is something that's audited by third parties. It is quantifiable, so we can measure it. It's not just a visual situation. It's something that's driven by mass balance. And a lot of times at international levels, when soybeans leave the United States, many of our partners across the seas are looking for these sustainable assurance protocol soybean products. Next slide, please. The USAP has an aim, their goals are basically to reduce land use impact by 10%, reduce soil erosion by an additional 25%, increase energy use efficiency by 10%, and reduce total greenhouse gas emissions by 10%. Next slide, please. As with many states around us, Illinois also has a nutrient loss reduction strategy. As of their earliest report in 2019, the biennial report, 29% of the corn acres receive full application of nitrogen. That's down considerably since the beginning of this century. 89% of those are applied when the soil temperature is in the safe range, meaning that when we're in that safe range, we minimize the loss of nitrogen to the environment, whether it goes back into the atmosphere or if it's lost down through the soil profile as nitrate. 92% included a labeled rate of a nitrification inhibitor. Nitrification inhibitors are used to keep nitrogen in a safe form that is stabilized in the soil, so it cannot be lost in the previous two manners that we spoke about, as far as volatilized back into the atmosphere or leach down through the profile into groundwater. The application rate typically in the fall of the year is about 78% of the maximum return to nitrogen rate that is recommended for corn, indicating that there is split application that goes on within nitrogen. phosphorus application. So 46% of the acres in Illinois receive a variable rate application of phosphorus. What this means is that they're putting the right rate on an acre basis throughout that field, reducing the overall rate to a field as far as the outcome is concerned. 7% of that is applied in the fall, and a great proportion of this is actually tilled into the soil and siphoned in that manner. 79% of the soil acres are tested every 4 years, which means that we're trying to look at what those soil test levels are. We're trying to fertilize up to what the optimum level would be for corn production. And then on a year-by-year basis, we apply back what to the soil, only what we remove. 31% of those acres are at the level that they don't need. They only need that removal rate of application apiece. So we have a great percentage of the acres that are below that optimum level, which is an interesting fact to myself. So next slide, please. So when we look at that number that we spoke about earlier, that percentage of acres in Illinois that are in cover crops, a lot of that hovers around the fact that we need to overcome the risk versus the reward that exists with cover crops. The risk that a farmer faces by placing or adopting cover crops into his operation is that initially he's going to have some equipment purchase there. It also is going to increase his purchase costs because now he is buying seed to put in there. There's also a learning curve that's involved with getting into another practice within your operation. So you need to learn how to fit it in amongst all the other things that you do at that time of year, meaning that there's a shift in workload. There's a chance that in the spring of the year that you won't get timely planting of your crops and get them in the ground where you can maximize yield, and you will actually lose yield. In addition to that, it's not always a given that these benefits that we see from cover crops are realized in that first year. In fact, it's a build across years. So very likely in that first year, because we're dealing with a physical, chemical, and biological system as we look at the soil, that it can take up to approximately 4 to 5 years where that farmer actually realizes some of those benefits from that cover crop as far as increased water holding capacity, the ability for the soil to take more water in at a quicker rate, those type of situations that go on there as we get further out in the years. And oftentimes in that interim, because he has those increased input costs and the purchase of equipment involved, he is actually operating at a reduced return on investment on those acres. Next slide, please. One of the other factors, or some of the other factors, have to do with that one size does not fit all. And so we'll talk a little bit about that on this slide. The economy of sizes differ from operation to operation. The larger the operation gets, the more number of acres farmed, the more it means as far as the more that's on the line as far as not getting your crops in a timely factor, trying to find the workforce to actually do the work on the farm, which increasingly becomes more of a problem for farmers to find farm hands. And depending on that operator's level of management expertise, whether he's a very good management individual or his management skills need some improvement, it may mean even more of an impact to that operation. All soil types are not created equal. And what we mean by that is that soils differ in their production levels, and they differ in their abilities to drain water away and out of the soil profile. So, successful adoption of practices is again, not all practices fit all soil types. We also have that situation that because our fields are individual practice units within that operation, that the soil health may differ from field to field. So back to that adoption year through year 5 to 6, improvement in soil health, we're going to see different rates of improvement across time as we go from field to field. So to say the least, it's a complicated situation for a farmer to really grasp and decide which fields are best fit to try cover crops on first. Next slide, please. Some of this can be overcome, and what's needed for success is we need really data-driven technical guidance at the field level. We do provide some of that through our partnership with Illinois Corn Growers Association, where we have a project that's called Precision Conservation Management, where we have placed precision conservation management specialists out in the field that help guide individuals through those first few years and through that adoption from year 1 through 5 or 6, and help them improve their practices across time. The other thing that is critical is the monetary offsets to help overcome that ROI that's at risk. So that loss of production. So part of that is the technical guidance, but then there's also the cost of inputs and the cost of equipment to begin with. Some of this is being provided through NRCS, which we do link growers with funding through NRCS, USDA, through PCM, but also some of that is we can also overcome by the current carbon markets that are being developed in the United States. Beyond carbon markets, there's also water quality benefits that come from practices that farmers are involved in. And so are in a partnership with the Iowa Soybean Association and their Ag Outcomes Group, their subsidiary, in a program that's called Soil and Water Outcomes Funds, where we stack actually those carbon offset credits and water quality offset credits on top of each other to create a larger payment per acre, trying to overcome what's at risk for ROI. And of course, creative opportunities for financing and investment on equipment are always welcome to our farmers. The other factor that's needed, and we look forward to working with universities in the state on, is that we need to have long-term cover crop research. And that research needs to cover that adoption curve, those adoption curve years. So years 1 through 5, just shooting in the dark, possibly longer, looking at those changes across time to the physical properties of the soil and the nutrient cycling that goes on within the soil to determine better what the ROI of soil health benefits across time are. So it's a bit like creating that business case for a farmer that, you know, if you adopt these practices 5 years out, 6 years out, your ROI will actually be better than what it was to begin with before you adopted that practice. And of course, education and open communication. And this doesn't mean just within agriculture. This means across all groups in our society here in the United States. It's not possible to move forward without cooperation and everybody being somewhat on the same page. So this means agriculture doing a good job of working with industry, environmental groups, consumers, one group learning about the others' challenges as we look at reducing climate impact and trying to collectively work together in a manner that will help move us towards that goal of reducing the impact of climate change. And of course, there's always going to be a bit of some counter communication off there, some negative noise about agriculture or about even industry or any other group that might be out there. And of course, we need to work collectively to silence those in a manner with data and evidence and proof of practice, what's going on and what we're trying to do. Next slide, please. So it wasn't that long back, and I believe some on the webinar today attended our Gather Around the Table event. And this was an ISA-hosted event on farm. It involved a dinner. We had invited stakeholders in the industry and some of the NGOs with a shared interest in promoting sustainability to learn more about Illinois farmers' sustainability and soybean production practices. Next slide, please. During the event, it was hosted by our District 1 Director, Ryan Frieders, who's center stage here on this slide, at Waterman, Illinois. And it was really meant to forge partnerships to further promote sustainably produced soybeans and to begin to build those relationships, the communication that I've talked about through roundtable discussions throughout the evening, getting to know guests and needs and efforts in promoting sustainability. ISA and the 43,000 soybean farmers believe that we share commitment and a desire to provide consumers sustainably grown food ingredients. being good stewards of the land, and reducing our environmental impact. The menu for the night included a soy-centric 4-course meal. It offered guests the opportunity to taste how delicious soybeans can be in the form of tofu, soy sauce, edamame, beef, and pork, and more. Attendees heard from Jenny Yang, the owner of Phoenix Bean and Jenny's Tofu, who relies on Illinois soybeans to deliver sustainably produced high-quality tofu products to her customers. These can be found in grocery stores in the Chicagoland area. The event also included a walking tour farm where Ryan and other farmers in attendance discussed sustainable production practices and environmentally friendly biodiesel. The event was attended by representatives such as ConAgra, Ferrera Candy Company, Midwest Dairy, Illinois Farm Bureau, Corvus Blue, Aimpoint Research, Clarkson's Grain, Ingredion, and the Nature Conservancy, and more. Next slide, please. Some of the comments that came out of the individuals that were at this event were the fact of data entry. So when a farmer enters into a carbon program and is going to sell those carbon offsets, or when he enters into a identity preserve type of production of soybeans from field to industry, some data is always needed to be entered into the system. And a lot of times this data is not easily moved from one system to another. So in other words, if that farmer has participated in a carbon project and he needs to input it into a field to market interface, he cannot simply port that data across. He has to re-enter it in, key it all in, upload it all again. And it's quite time consuming, and this does slow down the process and the participation at the farm level. Some that attended also felt that they're so far removed from the purchasing standpoint, and they want to know how they can better track soybeans from the field to the farm and to their production lines. So traceability was one of the issues that was brought up. Interesting point, some of the talk around GMOs and the chance that, or the fact that when you look at GMOs, largely what GMOs have done to production agriculture is that they have reduced the carbon footprint of production agriculture, and we can answer questions in and around that in the Q&A session. Next slide, please. And at this point, I'll hand it back to Megan so she can present some slides on TNC's ag goals and the history of ISAP, which we are also a partner of.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. So like I mentioned previously, across North America, we see our ag work being crucial to achieving our 2030 global biodiversity and freshwater goals. By 2030 in North America, we would like to see 50% of row crop acres in a soil health management system, and where applicable, utilizing conservation drainage practices. So there are many strategies to do this. And I know this is probably too small to read this graphic, but I wanted to just show our theory of change, just to underline that we understand that this is a very complex system and we need to work in many different arenas and pull many different levers to achieve our goals. So while we do work to demonstrate the production benefits of soil health management systems for farmers, we also actively engage key stakeholders across policy, business, and science sectors that have the opportunity to provide farmers with the resources, tools, and incentives they need to adopt soil health management systems and conservation drainage practices, which will ultimately increase profitability, protect water quality, and mitigate climate change. In the outcomes section, so in the bottom right-hand corner of the graphic, there again, we want to be crystal clear that our goals, the Nature Conservancy broadly, are for people and nature. So farmer viability and resilience is as equally as important as our environmental outcomes. Next slide. And really quickly, just to demonstrate how impactful having 50% of row crop acres across the US in a soil health management system could be, We have these really neat stats that are always just good to sit back and really see what's at stake or what could be claimed with this shift. So we're talking 25 million metric tons of GHG emissions mitigated, 116 million metric tons of soil erosion could be eliminated, 344 million pounds of nutrient loss to the environment reduced, and we could increase the acre feet of available water capacity in our cropland soils by 3.6 million acre feet. So this is worth, the reward is there, and I think it's crystal clear as long as we can mitigate those risks. Next slide. So I do want to reflect a little bit on what is meant by the soil health management system. So when we say the word soil health, we're really talking about the capacity of a soil to function as a vital living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. And two words there that I want to underline. The first one is function. So we know that the soil should be acting in a certain way. And then number two, I think the term health is really deliberate in its use here. It forces us to remember that soil is a living thing. And the definition also focuses our efforts on the importance of managing soils in a way that ensures habitat for that soil biology. And we care so much about providing habitat because it's the biology itself in the soil that provides the functions that we all know and expect a soil to provide. It almost seems second nature that we don't think about when we walk onto a crop field that we're not sinking down to our ankles. That's actually the function becoming apparent, and it's the biology that allows us to do that. So as we go to the next slide, sometimes it's hard to think, okay, exactly how do we get there? How can a row crop farmer manage their ground to be a hospitable environment for soil biology, which will in turn maintain that inherent soil function, which provides the environmental outcomes that we're seeking? So we often point to these four principles, and it soon becomes clear that all we are doing is taking a look over the fence to see what's happening on natural lands, which makes sense. If we're going to need to mimic the natural landscape if we want to achieve natural soil function on our cropland. So on the right-hand side of the circle, you're going to see the protect principles, minimizing disturbance, maximizing soil cover. That really provides the shelter for that soil biology. Then on the left-hand side, providing continuous living roots and maximizing biodiversity feeds the biology so that throughout the year, they have a diverse diet that can sustain multiple different types of soil biology. So if you are looking at these planning principles and comparing them to the vast swath of row crop ag currently, you might start to see stark differences between these principles and conventional row crop ag in the Midwest. And this is not meant as a critique. For a long time, technology did not exist to allow us to plant crops within this more type of natural management system. And I think that's why we see so much momentum and so much enthusiasm for us in ag conservation now, because we can confidently ask growers to consider this type of management system, knowing that they can do so profitably without yield drags if implemented correctly. And it'll actually help them buffer against what we see coming with our changing climate, which is more extreme weather events. So we can get those environmental outcomes while creating a more resilient landscape in our ag. Next slide. So again, this is all great talk philosophically, but how do we get these principles then translated into the practices that we're familiar with in row crop ag, or what practices would we be needing to see being implemented? So this is a crash course. I will not do any justice to any of these practices, but in a minute here, we'll just talk through what we are hoping to see as practices that implement the principles. So 1, quality no-till and strip-till. How can we reduce disturbance, minimize disturbance to protect that soil biology while still maintaining the proper seed bed for that row crop to flourish and to be successful? 2, we would want to see an extended or a diverse crop rotation, and where that's not feasible, utilizing cover crops as really extending that growing season beyond just when the cash crop is in the ground. And we want to be really particular here. We call them prescribed cover crops, knowing that they have to complement the upcoming cash crop to not work against the profitability or the viability of that cash crop. Third, nutrient management has to be adapted. The way nutrients cycle are inherently different between a conventionally tilled soil and a biologically active soil. So that is a ground that is ripe for research to better understand that nutrient cycling and to better help us see in a biologically active soil in this type of a system, when do we need to apply our nutrients to best suit that crop and to limit runoff or environmental runoff. So we do know that that has to be adapted to this new system. And then finally, sometimes considered the fifth wheel in Illinois with our limited livestock anyway, but truly integrating livestock back onto the row crop acres can really provide a whole nother suite of biodiversity. Feeding that biology is something that they're not going to be getting from any sort of cover crops or other cash crops. So I don't quite understand the magic that happens in a rumen, but just to say that this can really elevate the microbiology or the life that's in that soil. So if more soil health planning principles can be adopted on our Illinois row crop acres, growers would benefit by seeing more resilient and biologically active soils, and our community would enjoy the positive externalities of such a system, which we know can be reduced sediment, reduced nutrient loss to our streams, and avoided GHG emissions. But with all of this, I do want to be transparent. This is nothing short of a paradigm shift. And so it's really exciting to be on this webinar today because partners need to help with this transition or need to help with this paradigm shift. Research assistance, both technical and financial, and doing that signal from the supply chain that the supply chain wants and will reward farmers for growing in this system. Next slide. And I would be remiss in Illinois with many tile drained acres to not talk about conservation drainage as well. So we know that in Illinois with I think around 40%, 30%, don't quote me, of tile drained lands, there are practices that we can implement to reduce the nutrient loss being seen from that altered hydrology. So more broadly, we discuss edge of field practices, which not only mitigate tile drainage water quality losses, but also just surface water. So we have a whole host of practices from bioreactors, constructed wetlands to intercept tile water, along with just traditional filter strips or prairie strips that can intercept surface water coming from ag lands before going into our waterways and streams. And this is where historically Illinois TNC has done a lot of good work in developing and pushing forward the science of constructed wetlands in Illinois. Our Mackinac science crew has done a lot of pragmatic research to find out what size constructed wetland is needed to get the most nutrient reduction from the wetland without putting any more acres out of production than need to occur. So we're really excited to lend that science to Illinois and to advance that practice. This infographic comes from our Leading at the Edge roadmap that TNC recently collaborated on with the Soil and Water Conservation Society and the Meridian Institute. So last year they brought together a host of stakeholders to really sit down and talk about what are the current barriers to adoption of these practices and what are some innovative ways to overcome those barriers. So if you're interested in reading that full roadmap, it can be accessed at nature.org/edgeoffield. Next slide. So just like Illinois Soy and TNC, many organizations in Illinois are working in this exact same space. And in 2017, 8 organizations came together to form the Illinois Sustainable Ag Partnership. The mission is there on the screen. And the hope here is that we can really reduce the noise in this space by collaborating and providing consistent messaging to growers and advisors looking to adopt soil health management systems and conservation drainage practices. Next slide. So like I said, we started in 2017 with 8 organizations, and we're currently up to 13 member organizations whose logos you see here on the slide. And we're really excited by the diversity of our member group. Or members span industry, education, commodity groups, and traditional conservation organizations. And we feel as this diversity is really crucial as we can learn from one another, and we all have unique strengths and perspectives. It also helps that we also have different audiences so that many different audiences can hear these consistent messages. Next slide. But what does ISAP actually do? So we have a core set of programs that we're really proud of, including 2 intensive multi-part trainings on both soil health and conservation drainage that are for Illinois farmers, advisors, industry that are looking to increase their knowledge on those 2 subjects. We also offer an annual risk management conference to try to tackle, again, those very real risks of going into this transition for any grower or advisor. And we also host peer networks. So for the trainees to stay connected after the trainings, but then also just to host things like a monthly cover crop specialist call, where folks across the state that are dealing with this practice can share learnings. And we hope with that sharing, we can learn faster, fail faster, and move forward on successful cover crop practical adoption tips. So beyond those trainings, our website is also chock full of information. So if you have growers or advisors looking to get connected to research or news or recorded webinars, IllinoisSustainableAg.org is a good place to start. We also offer services if you're hosting educational events. So we have a rainfall simulator that will show up wherever your event is, as well as a pretty deep bench of experts. So we have a speakers bureau that you can request people to talk on different topics at your meetings. And then 2, I will just mention really briefly that while we all members operate under ISAP, many of us members work together on offshoots or on one-on-one collaborations to, again, assist and develop these same mission items. So in the past, Illinois Soy and the Nature Conservancy have collaborated on more outreach around non-operating landowners. So research has shown that non-operating landowners really do listen to their tenants. So to encourage tenants to start that conservation conversation with their landowners, Illinois and Soy and TNC collaborate on a multi-pronged messaging campaign across last year and early this year. And we think it's those kind of exciting collaborations that can come through a partnership like ISAP as well. So I think that's the last of my slides and the end of our content. So I'm excited to kind of move over to what I hope is the exciting part of today's conversation, where we open it up to questions from the group. And not only questions on the content, but also just if you have further ideas yourselves on ways that we can all collaborate from the different parts of the supply chain or research worlds that we're all coming from to advance sustainability on soy acres. So I will do my best here to check out if we have any Q&A. And I don't see any right now, so I will just ask folks again to engage with that platform. I will check the chat as well. So maybe while we wait for those to come in, Michael, I might just ask you to speak a little bit about, I really liked hearing you say that research is a really big need to advance these soil health management systems. And I don't know if you have any past collaborations or other ideas of ways people are working together to identify those questions.
Yes, we work with many of the universities in Illinois with funding of research. So we are a checkoff organization. What that means is it was back in the early 60s that federal law was passed, and a certain percentage of every sale of soybeans at the elevator, there was a fee removed from that. It amounts to 0.5% of the total sale. 0.25% goes to us, and 0.25% goes to the U.S. Soybean Marketing Board. And so what we do with those dollars is we fund research at the university level. For instance, we've in our second year of research on phosphorus with Andrew Margonot. We look forward to working with, in the near future, with many of the researchers on these long-term studies, as I've talked about, where we take and we look at cover crops from the year of adoption through many years out to better measure how by soil type, by latitude in the state of Illinois, these changes come about across time, and to better understand and coach farmers on what they can expect, of course, to have that data-driven information there, to have them make better decisions, and to have a better chance of success, as well as to really provide USDA and RCS with ideas around better cost share, how that might look across time, to really try to keep our farmers financially solvent across the process of this transition. So.
Yeah, I think your point about managing expectations or being very clear in the expectations that folks should see whenever they're adopting a new practice, that lends itself well to a question we received about, I think this was in my slides, what kind of noise are we hearing in the ag sustainability space, and where is that coming from? And for me, I think I put that in there. Historically, when the Illinois Sustainable Ag Partnership came together, we were coming together because it was very common for farmers to feel confusion if they would attend one field day and hear a whole host of maybe advice or things to look out for. That would be perhaps completely different if they attended a field day hosted by somebody else that had a slightly different bent or were providing different types of advice. And personally, if I get too many different disconcerting messages, I'll kind of shut down and wait to hear, one advice or more people agreeing on what those management systems are. So I think some of the noise that ISAP tried to combat was getting folks in one room and agreeing on consistent messaging, where these are the fact sheets or these are the implementation steps that we really recommend. And then Michael, to your point, here's very clear expectations to draw from certain practices, or here's very clear things to look for out in the field as you step into these practices. So we're not giving them the expectation that their whole farm and operation is going to change and be wonderful in 1 year, but very clear signs that they're moving in the right direction. Any comments, Michael?
Yeah, so I would look at the current state of agriculture and say that there's always trade-offs in every effort that you work toward. Climate change is no different. I think that you have to examine these situations very closely to find out what the pros and cons of them are, and it's not really the overall concept of climate change or the overall concept of how we sequester carbon, but it's that individual field effort that goes on in the field. Not all soils are created equal in the sense that they're going to sequester carbon at the same rate. They're very biologically different. They have different physical components to them, such as the percent sand, silt, and clay, which really has to do with the permeability of water down through the soil profile. In addition to, they all have different amounts of soil organic matter. So it's a complex system. I mean, it's really, you're getting down to the raw basics and the very depths of science in a lot of these things. And so they need to be examined. And that's, again, comes back to that fact that farmers really need expertise at the farm level. They need the CCAs of Illinois. They need the PCM specialists that we are providing them. They need the NRCS conservation agronomists out in the field. There's really a challenge in the state of Illinois. We don't have a real strong extension program anymore, and extension representatives in the state of Illinois. A large amount of that has kind of gone away as funding has declined for those at our land-grant university, which is the University of Illinois, and that is actually holding things back. It does, that University of Illinois and some of the NGOs as being that unbiased point of opinion that this is a direction to go, is lost in a lot of the other noise that comes from other sides. So
yeah, I think that's, again, if we're trying to unearth collaboration ideas or ways to move forward, that consistent science-based education and outreach that could be out there, the more of that gets out there, the better for the farmers to feel confident in adopting these practices. We have had another question come in. This is a great question. Is there an accounting system currently in place that would allow us to measure the percentage of row crop acres in a soil health management regimen? So I'll take a quick stab at that because I was remiss to mention this resource in my slides, but there are a whole host of tracking ways to know individual practices, what they're being completed on an acre. But sometimes it's hard to know those stacked practices on a single acre and year over year, because I think that's what's critical about a soil health management system is it's not the use of one of those practices every so often, and maybe they're turning on and off, but it's really that collective system being used year over year. So I do think that is tricky. The one database I would point to is from the folks in Indiana, the CTIC, Conservation Technology Innovation Center. They manage the Optus database, which utilizes satellite imagery to track tillage practices and cover crops amongst a large swath of the Corn Belt and exceedingly more. But what was interesting is just lately they added the ability to filter your search query to say exactly which practices have to show up multiple years over how many years. So I think that type of information might start to show us where stacked practices are occurring year over year. But Michael, I don't know if you know of other databases that are tracking that.
You know, other than the USDA ag census, I really don't know of any other place to look other than what you've mentioned. You know, and you're absolutely right. It's about putting these lands into these practices and keeping them there. And a very good point of that is in the carbon markets, in a lot of them, it requires an additionality. So in other words, if I've been no-tilling for 20 years, 15 years, 10 years, whatever the length of time is, that does not count in the carbon markets. And my big concern is that within any group of individuals, you have that chance that those acres might be pulled out to get back in and take advantage of that carbon market. And what that does to the atmosphere is that there's a huge carbon dioxide burst from taking those out of practice and putting them back into another practice. The other factor is we look at it as carbon sequestration and really drawing down the carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere. It's completely and beyond a doubt, we need to get more adoption of cover crops. That's really the golden egg in all this, because it's through the creation of that biomass of growing material and through photosynthesis that we capture carbon dioxide. And so adding that, so to speak, third crop into a system in a system year, we're actually capturing more carbon dioxide across that 365 days in that year. So
I will do the traditional 10-second pause to see if there will be any more questions coming in through either the chat or the Q&A. Oh, look at that. You ask and you shall receive. So one question here is, insects and fungi are key parts of living soil ecosystems. What progress is being made on reducing or eliminating pesticide and fungicide applications? Research has shown that fields with less insect diversity have more pest problems. What is the partnership doing to reduce pesticide use on farmer fields?
Yeah, I'll tackle that one, Megan. I think we're on the cusp of where, you know, I think across time, first to back up is that integrated pest management has actually drawn down the use of pesticides across time. Whether it's a fertilizer, whether it's a pesticide, farmers do not haphazardly add a practice to their operation, an application to their operation, because that's dollars coming off of the bottom line. They're trying to produce that crop in a very economical manner so that they can recoup as much of the money out of that bushel, those bushels per acre as they can. And so We also live in a great time where there's a lot of startup companies that are coming to fruition. So there's a lot of technology, such as there's a major equipment dealer that has a technology that's called See and Spray. So basically, as I'm traveling across the field, it senses when it sees weeds, and it only turns on that herbicide application at that time. The flip side of this too is that through the use of these pesticides, but using them in a very responsible manner, we're able to eliminate trips across the field. A very good example of this is what herbicide technologies in crops have brought to us. And that's the fact that previous to herbicide technologies, we relied a lot on tillage to actually remove weeds from the field. So every time we till that field, we're driving a tractor across that field that's burning diesel fuel and emitting carbon monoxide to the atmosphere. We also are opening up and oxygenating that soil, which creates a burst of microbial activity. And as those microbes are living through their life cycle, they're emitting carbon dioxide, the very carbon that they're removing from the soil, to do their processes in that soil. And so they're not all bad. The answer in row crop farming is not necessarily all organic. It is more through the 4 R's, which are practiced heavily in the state of Illinois: the right rate, the right source, at the right time, in the right place. And that's what it's really all about. And that holds true for, and could hold true for herbicides, insecticides, and fungicides as we move across time. So.
Yeah, and with the Sustainable Ag Partnership, I'll just mention part of our advanced soil health training is a complete module on that soil biology. So again, to really understand how the soil health management system can impact biology. And what we quickly learn is exactly to the point of the commenter that beneficials can help, right? There are a lot of predatory beneficials that can attack insects that are attacking our cash crops. So how to utilize those relationships and how to, again, provide them the right environment where they can thrive as well. And so I would just say with that training, we do try to systematically walk through that complicated issue and think through what are ways that we can reduce harm to those beneficials to allow them to efficiently do as much as they can in controlling or regulating the pest populations in that soil. So again, very complicated, but we're hoping with peer learnings and sharings that we're advancing on that topic. And then possibly the final one for today is just a comment about being surprised about modern agriculture, just the amount of data that can be captured on the farm, either inputs or outputs, and how much that data is underutilized. So what could be done to help producers better manage this data? And if we're going to show the ROI benefits of soil health, we're going to have to figure out a way to show in the data how they are profitable in the long run.
Yeah, one of the biggest challenges for farmers, yes, a lot of the equipment is available to, is capable of capturing a lot of data. And one of the biggest challenges is rural broadband, internet access while you're in the field, because a lot of these technologies are built to communicate on the go. And without rural broadband and strong internet signals, it makes it very difficult to accomplish this task. So the flip side of that is that that data is private to the farmer. It's not a public source. In fact, data privacy is one of those things that farmers hold very near and dear to their heart. They're very concerned about their data getting into the wrong hands. In the wrong hands sense, it means that, I sign up, let's say I'm a farmer, I sign up for a carbon market, and that carbon market publishes my individual data out there. That is a concern of the farmer, as much as when you talk about, and I think this question was kind of geared towards big data use in the sense of mining aggregate data. farmers look at their data and they believe that it has some value to it too. So in a sense, it's that if I sign up for your program or your service, are you going to use your data to create new tools that you are going to charge me back for? And that is another stumbling point that exists. So until I think we have some sort of guidance or guardrails in and around data privacy, both individual data privacy and aggregate data privacy, in addition to rural broadband, it's really going to be hard to get over that hump where we can actually build these big data sets. Yep, there is a lot of data out there. It's just not aggregated. It's trying to get it aggregated that's the challenge.
So if anything, we've unearthed just, again, that need for continued collaboration, continued work to advance our missions to get more sustainability on our row crop acres. And so I think with that, Michael, I will hand it back to you for the final wrap up.
Thanks, Megan. At this time, that's all the time we have for questions. I wanted to take a moment to thank Megan for joining us on the webinar today. Thank you. And for all of you that attended, thank you to all. You can find both mine and Megan's contact information on this slide. Please reach out to us. We encourage you all to reach out to us if you have any questions. If you'd like to have us as speakers, please reach out to us, whether that's in large groups or just talking with your individual company about agriculture. I'd encourage you all to stay up to date on sustainable soy by signing up for the emails on the Sustainable Soy News and Partnership Opportunities at the link on the screen. Don't forget to complete the short survey at the conclusion of the webinar. Side note, this coming week is something called Farm Progress Show. If this has kind of sparked some interest about learning more about agriculture, it's a great opportunity to really immerse yourself in agriculture. You will find equipment dealers there. You will find organizations like our own there. You'll find seed companies there. You will find all kinds of companies there that you can gain information from and learn more about agriculture. With that, thank you all for attending. We hope you have a great rest of your day.